Yeah, welcome back to the main shrine room. And I want to really warmly welcome Vishvapani, who's come to join us tonight to talk about his book. So we'll go into that shortly, we'll kind of unpack the book, what's in the book, themes of the book. But I just wanted to start by introducing Vishvapani for people that might not have met him or even heard of him. So I want to kind of just say a little bit about Vishvapani. So Vishvapani, he encountered Buddhism as a teenager. So what age were you when you encountered Buddhism?
First encounter, first time I went through the door of Buddhist Centre was 14.
14, wow. Yeah, so you encountered Buddhism very young. And then you were ordained in 1992.
That's right.
Is that correct? Yeah. And then so during that time, since being ordained, Vishvapani's worked for the order and the movement, so the order that we're a part of and the wider movement, in multiple different roles. So he served the movement in many different ways, institutionally, but also through teaching and writing. He's enriched the community and the culture a lot with his thought. And he founded the Dharma Life magazine, which is a magazine from our community that ran for a number of years. And he also published, so we're going to be looking at his new book, Reimagining Buddhism, but he also published a really good book about the historical Buddha called Gautama Buddha, and I read that. It was one of the first books I read when I was coming along, and I really recommend that as a book to understand the historical Buddha, kind of understand the context that he's in and his teaching and all of that. So I won't say any more about that, but I just wanted to flag that because I think that is a book that's really worth reading. So he's published books, he's published articles. He's also contributed to BBC Thought of the Day a lot, so on Radio 4, kind of giving a Buddhist perspective on things, and also worked a lot in the mindfulness sector, kind of teaching mindfulness and helping mindfulness kind of embed into our wider culture. So lots of like a varied and rich life of spreading the Dharma in multiple ways. And most recently, he's written this book called Reimagining Buddhism. So it's understanding Sangharakshita and his teachings. And I read this, as soon as this came out, I read it as quickly as I could, and I absolutely devoured it. I did really enjoy it. And I don't really want to say too much about it because we're going to spend the whole evening talking about it. But I found it both engaging, I found it an engaging read, but I feel like it also helped me deepen my understanding of the Dharma, but also the particular presentation of the Dharma that we practice at the London Buddhist Centre and in our wider community through exploring Sangharakshita and his approach to the Dharma. So I'm really pleased to have Vishvapani here tonight. So let's just give Vishvapani a warm welcome before we begin. Okay, so I thought we could just start for anyone here or online might not have heard of Sangharakshita. They might not have come across him before. So I thought maybe you could just start by giving a brief introduction to Sangharakshita, his place in our movement.
Yeah. Okay, so who is Sangharakshita? Well, he is the founder of Triratna, and in 1967, he started something called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, which later renamed Triratna. In fact, what he started in 1967 was in effect the London Buddhist Centre, because it was a charity which I believe has been inherited by this place, or at least he started teaching in Covent Garden, and then there was a centre in Archway, and then it moved here. So, so he's the founder of, he's an Englishman, and before doing all of that, he lived for 20 years in India. So we've just celebrated the centenary of his birth. He was born in 1925. He discovered Buddhism through reading, essentially, as a teenager, and had an immediate insight into what it meant. He was a highly intelligent, precociously intelligent young man, and he was also he was conscripted into the army. And this was 1942, so most people who were conscripted at that time, it would have been D-Day. But he was a really rubbish soldier. We have a lot to thank for that. But he was brilliant at, telegraphs, Morse code and so on. So he was shipped out to Sri Lanka, amazingly enough, a Buddhist country. He'd already become a Buddhist. And at the end of the war, he, having spent time listening to Japanese military telegraph, I can't think of the word. Anyway, Morse code stuff. And he became a wandering spiritual seeker in India around the time of independence. Eventually he became ordained as a Theravadan Buddhist monk, but he set himself up on the basis of his reading of the whole Buddhist tradition as a sort of interdenominational monk, following different Buddhist traditions, writing tremendous amount, teaching a tremendous amount. And that was the start of the connection that we have in Triratna with India, and particularly with people at the bottom of Indian society, which connects to what we were just hearing about with Karanar. So he spent that time in India working in that way. Then he came to the West, and for various reasons, which I go into in the book, which we probably don't need to go into now, he ended up starting his own Buddhist movement. And maybe that will do, except to say that he was a teacher, a writer, a poet, and very prolific in all of those fields.
Yes. I think that's a good introduction to him as the man. And then you also had a personal connection to Sangharakshita, didn't you? And so I wondered whether you could talk about what your personal connection to him, and why did you choose to write this particular book?
Well, so as you gather, I've been involved with Triratna for a long time, and it's a long personal connection. In the early years of Triratna, he was very, very present. He was around, and he was one of the people you might meet. You went on a retreat or something like that. And so I've known him. I knew him. Then I moved when I was my 30s, I moved into a community in Birmingham called Majjhimaloka. So some of you might know about Adhisthana, which is sort of the central retreat centre for Triratna. Well, Majjhimaloka was a kind of precursor. It was a very big house in suburban Birmingham. And there was a community of the sort of the headquarters of Triratna. And there was a community of however many were, 12, 13 of us. And Sangharakshita lived next door to the community in a granny flat. We called it a Bhante flat. Bhante being the kind of respectful colloquial term that I will no doubt slip into calling Sangharakshita Bhante. So he would have dinner with us every evening. For the first 3 years that I lived there, so I was having dinner with him every evening. And although those could be awfully stilted, especially when there were visitors there, and they developed a reputation of, oh God, it's so it's awkward. But when there weren't visitors there, it was very different, and we got on really well. He's immensely literate, cultured, knows everything about Buddhism, and I'm certainly not on his level, but we shared a lot of interests, and so we got to know each other in that way. And at that point he got ill. At some point he got ill and was in a really, really difficult state, and sometimes I was one of the people who would be up in the middle of the night with him, feeling very vulnerable and very anxious, actually, not able to sleep. And so that was a completely different view of him. And then you said I'd worked for Triratna for all these years. Actually, I haven't. Well, no, you had. It's interesting. You had the impression that I had, because I've somehow or other managed to, by writing books and things, to remain quite a central figure within the order. But for 20 years, I didn't work for Triratna, and that was quite deliberate. And actually, that was to do with wanting to step back from and just get a bit more perspective. I mean, 20 years is quite a long time, and I had a family and needs to earn a living and all the rest of it. But I wanted to step back and get a different kind of relationship, a different perspective. And that was partly to do with some of the difficulties and controversies that you will no doubt encounter very quickly around Sangharakshita. I wanted to get a different perspective on those things. It was, and yet I've written this book. How did that happen? So I guess in that process I realised that Buddhism, it was very, very important to me, the centre of my life. In a way, I never doubted that. And that actually it was Sangharakshita's, there was something about Sangharakshita's teaching which spoke to me in a way that other Buddhist teachers didn't. Not that I'm quite familiar with a range of Buddhist teachers, but it's not that I don't have respect for them. But there was something about Sangharakshita's teaching, even though there were things I disagreed with sometimes in what he said. And having been over the dinner table with him, I felt quite able to disagree with him. Nonetheless, there was something there that was quite unique. And so I just started to explore that, partly through writing, not thinking I was going to write a book. And I had a sense that there was something, if I could distill that for myself, then that would be helpful for other people. And that's become increasingly evident. Sangharakshita's complete works, actually they're not even complete, have been published. And you're talking a shelf worth, and a long shelf at that, a bookcase worth of 27 volumes. And they're
chunky books.
Chunky, yeah, they're big volumes. It's ridiculous. But even someone like you who's ordained, where do you start? And so, yeah, maybe that'll do. I could say more about how I approached it, but that'll do for now.
Maybe we'll come into that.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing that I'd like to ask you is kind of, what actually is this book? So it's called Reimagining Buddhism. It's clearly about Sangharakshita, but is it an autobiography, or is it a biography? Is it kind of a summary? Like what is the book?
Well, that's a good question. So I do read quite widely, and I did an English degree, and a lot of the books that I most enjoy are sort of literary studies. That might be a term. There's something that's evoking, who is this writer? Because you can read a biography. I do read biographies, and I suppose I've written one about the Buddha, although it's not exactly a biography. And you can read the biography of a poet or someone like that, and somehow you've learned quite a lot about their life, but you don't fully understand how all of that enabled this person to produce this amazing work. The work seems to come from a different level from the account of their activities and even their intellectual influences. And then, having studied literature, I'm familiar with literary criticism and art criticism and that sort of thing. And actually, I still read it. But that can be, that's an academic discipline. And you take the text, you take the work, and you try and figure out what's going on in the work. And of course, there are lots of different ways you can then interpret that. And that seems to be kind of divorced from the person. At least
Right.
sometimes it does. So I was led one way or another to a sense that what I really wanted to explore was, who is Sangharakshita spiritually? What's his character? What's his sort of spiritual character? How does his imagination work? You know, on a mythic or archetypal level. How did he think? Who is he fundamentally? Who is this person? And that, you know, he's obviously someone who's immensely erudite and actually very wise as well. So that's quite presumptuous in a way. Except that this is where the literary studies come in. I mean, it is ridiculous to think you could write something that really gets to the heart of who Milton is. I mentioned Milton. I was just walking down Roman Road. I don't know if you ever noticed on the flats. There's Swinburne House and Milton House and Keats House. You never noticed that, those flats. I used to live in. They're named after these poets. And Moore House, who's a very obscure, long forgotten Victorian writer. Anyway, any of those people, you know, there are books about them where you really feel, yes. So I thought, yeah, it is possible. But it's not an academic approach. It's not just a biographical approach. It's not a whimsical approach. It's not. Really didn't want to just sort of list Sangharakshita's ideas, because the question is, why did he hold those ideas? And that's actually quite personal. So that's I don't know. I don't know if what I just said makes any sense, but that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. Maybe it's hard to understand without reading it, but from having read it, I really get what you're saying. It kind of feels like it's doing multiple things, but in a very unified way or something. It does, yeah.
I mean, look, who are you, Sangatara? You know,
well, now you are.
Who am I, Vishvapani? You know, do I actually know what are the real forces that are driving me? What's, you know, it's. So one of the things I quote in that is a line from W.B. Yeats, that every person has a myth, and if we could name that myth, we would know that person. So maybe that's true of all of us, but we probably can't name that myth. And in some ways it feels very obscure, but in another way, everything we do, every utterance we make, all of the choices we make in our life, they have a shape. They're to do with who we are quite deeply and fundamentally. So when someone has written millions of words, you can read as many of them as you can get through, then of course they're revealing. And when Sangharakshita is actually very, very self-aware. So I found that he was often telling us, this is who I am. This is how I envisage spiritual life. This is how I perceive things, and this is why I express them in that way.
Yeah, so you're kind of trying to find kind of the personal within the universal expression.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so it's called Reimagining Buddhism. And when I was thinking of that, I think it's quite a bold title, kind of Reimagining Buddhism. So kind of what are you saying, and why does Buddhism need reimagining?
Well, this, I think, takes us to something about Buddhism itself, which Sangharakshita often said and it tried to explain, which is that you could see Buddhism itself as an act of imagination. So the Buddha had his experience of enlightenment, and other people have been enlightened in subsequent times, in their own way, in their own experience. And that experience can't be put into words. It's beyond concepts and so on. And that's what the Buddhist tradition always says. And that's Sangharakshita thought that was very, very important. And yet, it has to be communicated, it has to be given a shape or a form. So whether that's the Buddha's first teaching, the Four Noble Truths, that there are ideas there, but there's also a sense of the path, a sense of this is who you are, this is who we are as human beings, this is who we are deeply as human beings, which is why we experience the world as we do, and this is how we transform. This is the path we follow. So those are the Four Noble Truths, you could say. So that is the Buddha's act of imagination. Or to put it in slightly different terms, again going back to the Buddha thought, how can I possibly share this wordless experience with anyone? And then he envisaged, he had a vision of all beings as lotuses at various stages of unfoldment. So that was what impelled him to formulate the Dharma and formulate his understanding in all sorts of different ways. So you could say that that's an act of imagination. And Sangharakshita, what he wanted to rediscover Buddha, in the first instance, I think he wanted to rediscover Buddhism and its meaning for himself, which meant it had to, Buddhism doesn't live in books, it doesn't live in institutions, it doesn't live in the fact that there are several 100 million Buddhists in the world. It lives, according to Sangharakshita, in the experience of human beings, when we practice and realize and understand the Dharma for ourselves. That's what he wanted to do. So that's a kind of act of imagination. And then when he wanted to share that, he found he needed to put it in new ways. And underneath all of the different ways that Sangharakshita taught, he wanted to connect imaginatively with what Buddhism really meant. And then in a way you can express it in lots of ways, once you've really felt it, experienced it. So, Sangharakshita then had a career writing and teaching to try to make Buddhism accessible, to try to show what it was in its essence, that people could see beyond all the complexity of the different schools and so on, and bring alive in people's lives, and doing that individually and collectively. And here we are.
So do we need to keep on reimagining Buddhism, or has it been reimagined for us and now we need to follow it? Where does that?
Well, we need to reimagine Buddhism. Yeah. Bhante, he's actually quite clear about that, that this isn't something that can just be done once. And it's not to say that you have to reimagine things. Maybe the language starts to wear out at a certain point. It's not to say you have to make it all up from scratch every time, because we do this in relationship with other people, and in relationship. Well, also we mustn't be too presumptuous to think that you or I or the rest of us here can reimagine Buddhism. That is quite a tall order, in the sense of not having, just going back to the original text. We're going to give it a completely new shape. And I think this is why Sangharakshita is important, because I've immersed myself in his mind, really, by writing this. And it does make me reflect on the smallness of my own mind by comparison. And so this is the role of a teacher, But if you think of Buddhism as something, as a living spirit or force, then it isn't just enough to repeat the words that the teacher said. It's about connecting with the inspiration, the spirit, the meaning, the practice that's there within the teacher's words. And then when you re-express that in your own way, it might look rather different. And that's, of course, that's fine. I mean, in fact, that's really important. That's creativity. But it needs to be based on really engaging with a deep source of meaning, which I would just call the Dharma. And for me, Sangharakshita's way of expressing that, I find quite... I just find it's meaningful for me. You know, it speaks to me.
So you've obviously spent a number of years now kind of immersed in all of the different work. How many years did you say you've been working on this?
Well, the process started 7 years before I finished it, I think. Although initially I wasn't writing a book. I was just going to write a little paper. And eventually I realised, well, I got to a point where I kind of realised that what I needed to do was the kind of thing I just outlined. I couldn't just outline some ideas. I couldn't do a biography. I mean, actually, I was asked at one point to write Sangharakshita's biography, but I mean, he's written so many memoirs. I don't know I don't think we really need that now. So I realised that what I needed to do was this, and I just started working on it while having to earn a living. COVID was good because the government were paying me to sit at home, and I had time on my hands to get more engaged with this. And then eventually I realised that it was still taking an awfully long time. I had to drop other things and just focus on it for at least a couple of years, I'd say.
And so one of the things I really liked about this book is you kind of drawing out the common threads in his teaching. So it's kind of, you've got all of these teachings, but actually when you looked at them as a whole, you saw there were recurring themes and recurring threads. I wonder whether you could tell us, like, what are some of the important threads that actually make Sangharakshita's presentation distinctive, and therefore the way that we practice here at the London Buddhist Centre, how we all practice distinctive.
Well, I won't try to summarise the book. That's too much. But I guess that the starting point is the sense of the Dharma. You know, I hope you're familiar with the term Dharma. It basically means Buddhist. Buddhist teachings, the truth that those teachings are expressing. The Dharma as a living force. And the more I focused on that, the more I saw, oh yes, he's saying that again. He's saying it again, he's saying it again. And he, seeing the Dharma as a living force, or a living spirit, or something like that, something that you touch, is kind of bigger than you, it's beyond just your personality. And he takes that in different ways, in different aspects of his teaching. So one way that he takes that is to present the process of practicing Buddhism, Buddhist practice, as akin to the growth of a plant that's rooted in the soil. There's a seed. In a sense, a seed contains the whole thing. But as we practice, we're trying to bring into our awareness something that's bigger than us. And doing that, I'm being rather vague here, but doing that is the process that he often talks about of growth and development, even evolution. And he uses these terms a lot all the way through his work. So what does it mean to practice the Dharma? Well, what does it feel like to be a bud that's growing into a flower? And so he will sometimes talk in those terms. And then there's another way of looking at all of that, which is much more philosophical, which is grounded, in his case, in Buddhist doctrine. And he talks about conditionality, the way things happen, the way that one thing arises out of another thing. And he wants to particularly express the fact that the path is a sort of progressive, augmentative, spiral process. So probably you've encountered these kind of terms already at the London Buddhist Centre. And that one little insight I had was that is the same, at least that's another way of saying the Dharma's about growth. Maybe it's obvious. I just said it sounds completely obvious. But, sometimes he is quite philosophical. Sometimes he's quite poetic or something like that, but it's the same meaning in both cases. And then of course there's what happens when all of that arrives in the modern world. And the first thing to say is it doesn't mean anything necessarily to do with the forms that have developed already. It might do, but that's not the important thing. The important thing isn't to establish Theravadan Buddhism here for Sangharakshita or Zen or Mahayana or any of these things, Tibetan Buddhism, fine though that is for people who want to do that. The important thing is to sort of kindle that fire of the Dharma, to nurture that growth of something in Western soil. I mean, maybe we don't even use the term Western anymore. Maybe we need to use a term like modern or something like that. That what does Buddhism mean today? And it means looking at then all of the established forms in that light, drawing from them in ways that that serve that process, bringing the Dharma alive.
And so I guess I think when people come along, it can be a bit confusing as to what Buddhism do we practice. It's kind of like, okay, there's some of the practices from early Buddhism, but then there's figures from later Buddhism. Who was Sangharakshita to kind of pick and choose from the tradition? What gave him the right to do that in a way?
Well, that's a good question, and some people would say he has no right, and therefore Triratna is not really a proper Buddhist movement. And if you think that you need the imprimatur of an established school in order to be teaching, in order to be doing what I'm doing right now, then you're in the wrong place. So who was Sangharakshita to do it? I mean, he didn't claim, when he was asked that question, he would say things like, it's not as if there is someone who's in a position of power who can authorize this person or that person. Fundamentally, what happens is someone starts teaching. If that makes sense to other people, they put it into practice and they find that it works for them, then that is the authority. If you can make sense of the Buddhist tradition by presenting it in this way or that way, and if that makes sense to other people, then that's an authoritative version of Buddhism. And that might sound a bit thin, but really, what else is there? I mean, of course, this is an issue in Triratna because we have our own lineage and so on. But if we're just if we're just reliant on a tradition that's been established for 2,500 years, then how can we ever do what's needed in order to bring it alive right now? Something like that. It's quite hard to talk about these things, actually. Anyway, ask me another question.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I guess it leads on from this that Sangharakshita often talked in images. You mentioned him using kind of like organic images of growth, but he also talked a lot about the myth of the translator, didn't he? And kind of the archetype of the translator. And I think part of what he was trying to do was, because he was, he was very well versed in the whole Buddhist tradition, wasn't he?
Yes.
And he kind of soaked up the whole tradition, and then he was trying to translate it in a way that was helpful for now. How do you think he saw his role in that myth?
Yeah, interesting. So you could take a Sanskrit text of the Heart Sutra, which you may be familiar with chanting, and hold up your phone to it and look at it on Google Translate, and it would render the Heart Sutra into into English words, right? So in a way, translation is a mechanical process. But what he meant was something much deeper than that. To really, let's say you want to translate a poem, and you hold a Spanish poem up to Google Translate, you're probably not going to get a great English poem out of it. In order to do that, you need to really, you need to go as deeply as the poet themselves went, and to find the right words in your own language for the meaning. In other words, you need to go beyond the words to the meaning. And when you're talking about something like the Dharma, there'll be layers upon layers of meaning. And to get to the deepest layer of meaning, that was really what Sangharakshita wanted to do. That, he talked about that as going for refuge to the three jewels, to having this kind of direct existential engagement and encounter with the Buddha, with the Dharma, and with the spiritual community. Having done that, then you can create your text, your poem. And that's not just a mechanical transposition of concepts and words. It's a re-rendering of the meaning. So that's what he meant in theory. But in practice, what he meant was just finding out through experience, and through that really, really considered, really, I would say profound and imaginative engagement with the meaning of Buddhism, how it could be expressed in this day and age.
And I think one of the contradictions is in some ways Sangharakshita seems very traditional in his approach to Buddhism, and then in other ways he seems extremely radical. I wonder if that's part of that
I mean, in a way that process I just described would necessarily produce that contradiction, seeming contradiction. Because on the one hand, it's a deep respect for tradition, for the sources of tradition, let's say in the Buddha himself and people like that. And on the other, and then really not wanting what I'm calling mechanical transposition, or just changing things when you you write your own version of a poem or a play or something that is your play, is really just loosely based on the original one. So he didn't want that. But at the same time, he did feel that, I mean, he was extremely self-confident. That's one of his characteristics. He did actually feel that for himself, he could perceive what Buddhism is fundamentally about. You or I may agree or disagree with him, but he felt that. And it was on that basis that he felt able to change things, do things quite differently.
And I guess there were these two aspects to him as well, weren't there? There was quite a scholarly, monkish type to him, and then there was also the poet and the kind of romantic in that, not in the romance sense, but in the poety side of things. And beauty and imagination, they're a big part of his presentation, aren't they? I wonder whether you could say a bit about how the poet aspect came through in the presentation of the Dharma. Yeah,
I could do. What do you think? I mean, what appeals to you in Sangharakshita?
Well, I think the strong emphasis on the imagination feels like a really distinct emphasis that he's brought. He's kind of seen that we need that, and he's brought that out in kind of a new way.
Okay, but I'll tell you why I sort of wanted to turn it back on you. I think talking about someone who isn't here starts to become a bit abstract, you know? So I think in writing the book, I was talking about Sangharakshita and Sangharakshita's imagination, but it's like the principle of the thing is we can only you can describe that, and I can give an account of how he put that. But actually to feel it, you can only really do that on the basis of having a sense of what the imagination is in your own experience, and what the meditation as a kind of, just to use this language, an imaginative process. What that feels like when you're really trying to do it, and yeah, past a certain point, I think we have to come back to ourselves. You know, what is it? What are the images? What is it when I really respond to an image? And that might be an artwork. It might be the Buddha. It might be a movie, something like that. It might be a dream you've had that's really struck you. There's something meaningful in that, and so to understand what Sangharakshita's meaning when he's talking about the imagination, I think we have to go back to our own experience of those things. Yeah. So that was why I asked you that question. I'm still interested what you.
Oh, I think thinking about it, it's kind of you mentioned at the beginning how every person's life is a myth.
Yeah.
And an expression of that myth. I think one of the things since practicing Buddhism in this tradition, I've got more and more in touch with the fact that my life is underpinned by a myth, and what that is mysterious. But there's certain things that I'm moved by, certain images that I'm moved by and drawn to and lit up by, and it's not completely clear what they are. But the fact that that's kind of included in the Dharma and in a way to practice the Dharma feels like it excites me. Yeah,
I feel the same way. And I just think that the reason I think I came back to saying, not that I really went away, but the reason that I sort of discerned, what is this response that I do have to Sangharakshita? It was, oh yes, he's allowing me to do that. Or he's giving me a kind of opening. He's showing me a way that I can open to myself. And he's doing that because that's how he lived. That's how he experienced. And it really does show me something about what Buddhism means, which I don't get from some other expositions of it. And yes, it does actually relate to poetry and beauty and myth and all these sorts of things. And so I think that's the kind of level we got to come back to really when we're engaging with Sangharakshita, maybe with any spiritual teacher, or maybe with Buddhism. It's like, what does this mean? What are the levels on which this can speak to me? And what are the levels of being human, of being me?
So I guess how would reading this book, engaging with Sangharakshita and his ideas, how would that help people in this room or online do that? To kind of how does reading about Sangharakshita help us go deeper into our experience in that way?
Okay, it's a good question. It's not really one I should have asked. I should have thought about that, shouldn't I? So it's a book. I look at it and I feel quite pleased with it in a way. I put a lot of work into it. There it is. I also feel a little disappointed by it. It's just this square of paper, with all these words on pages. Whereas for me, actually, it was something else. And I suppose of other books that I've read that have really moved me, that have, including books in that sort of genre about there's an amazing book a couple of years ago by Catherine Rundell about John Donne's Super Infinite. There's another book that influenced me was Jonathan Bates' biography of Wordsworth. But there are lots of books I've read over the years that take me into the the sort of imaginative space of I was going to say great man, but a great person. I think such beings do exist in the world, and if they're writers, then the writing is a way in to that expansive consciousness. And actually, what I was trying to do was to create a sense of that in relation to Sangharakshita. So you can tell me if I've got any... I mean, I know I haven't succeeded in what I wanted to do, so I'm sorry. I apologise for the limitations of my book, but it's the best I could do. And yeah, but it's that's what I want from a book. You know, I don't want to read a detective novel. I want to read great literature. I want to get into the mind of a great, an expansive consciousness. So that's what I try to do.
Great. I've got a couple.
Actually, I do quite like reading detective stories as well. There you go. That just came out.
I've got a couple more questions I like, but I wonder whether now would be a good time to kind of open it up.
Yeah.
So Vishvapani is keen to get any questions from people. If there's any questions for Vishvapani.
Yes.
I've read the book and I found it super helpful to just put his sort of ideas and influences in perspective.
Yeah.
I'd just be interested, because you knew him personally and all of that
Right.
sort of stuff, you were quite familiar. What surprised you when you went about sort of your research for this book?
Right. Wow, that's a good question. I think that the sort of big thing was, Bhante, he could come to dinner and be rather distant, rather sort of abstracted, and because of the whatever dynamic had been established, the conversation always went through him. It could be really rather boring and rather stilted, and he could be quite annoying like that. One of the things that really became clear to me was the extent to which his thoughts were occupied with this so much else. I was tracing lines of thought, even images that are there, weaving together, developing, augmenting, going in different directions, being re-expressed over 7 decades in his life. And it's a vast array of explorations of spiritual life, explorations of art and the Dharma and consciousness and all of those things. And one of the reasons that he was... So he was quite introverted, I think, in some ways. Despite founding a Buddhist movement, quite introverted. It was a very rich life. That just became much clearer to me. And that the reason he wasn't always particularly responsive was he was sort of dwelling somewhere else. Yeah. I wonder if there's anything else. No, that'll do. Yes, Thomas.
This might be a bit of an unfair question, but you try to find something of the essence of who he
Yes.
was. Can you say even in a few words, like even kind of a glimpse of what you feel like you found, like what was this essence that you felt like you've touched on?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'd rather not. Just a few words. I think I have been talking about that. I think it is, and I might in 6 months' time say something different, but I think it is the sense of the Dharma as a living force, something that he experienced. It was also something that was bigger than him, and yeah, if I had to Yeah, there you go.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, what about you, Thomas? What do you think?
That's a good question. That's a great question. Yeah, well, the way...
Okay, so I'm not going to ask you to sum up Sangha, right.
Yeah.
So maybe this is why I find it difficult to answer your question. It's quite hard to give you an answer without becoming quite abstract.
Yeah.
But maybe if I asked you the question, what is it for you that you respond to in Sangharakshita or in the Buddhist movement, in Triratna as you've experienced it, which in a way is the expression of something that he inspired?
Yeah, I mean, the feeling for me is that I've kind of came as a kind of closed-minded, fairly closed-minded person, and somehow something, just in the way that like a kind of standard classes and meditation teaching, all that, something kind of just like, I don't know, hammered, broke through a kind of very closed-minded sort of narrow view of the world, and just expanded a much bigger vision that I was completely unaware of, and yet somehow felt like, oh, I had known it the whole time. Like it was like exactly what I thought about the world. And so for me, it was like Sangharakshita was just this communicator, someone who had a vision and who could somehow, I don't know, pierce through, break through. That's
Yeah.
how I don't know. That's my answer right now.
There you go. That's a much better answer than the one I gave, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Anyways, yes. Hello.
I was just wondering how your relationship with Sangharakshita changed in this quite long process.
How it changed. Well, all right. So look, one of the things that I was doing. So when I was at Majjhimaloka, I was running. So the Triratna was called the FWBO, and I was doing two things. I was running the FWBO Communications Office, and I was editing a magazine called Dharma Life. And so the magazine had inherited from a previous magazine called Golden Drum, which had a kind of polemical and almost sort of missionary rationale behind it. And it was, we have got an answer to what Buddhism should look like in the modern world, and through this magazine we will communicate that to people. We will broadcast to our movement and to the rest of the world how Buddhism ought to be practiced in the modern day. And so my experience had been coming into this Buddhist movement with that sort of thing and really not liking it, and saying, I want to blow the whole thing up. I want to do things completely differently. I want to have lots of different voices. I don't want to have a polemic. I want to tell stories. I don't want to hear Sangharakshita quoted again and again and again. Thank you very much. Right. Meanwhile, in the FWO Communications Office, I was the person who, when critical newspaper articles and things like that were written about Sangharakshita, we went through a whole big crisis around that, criticising difficulties that had happened in Triratna, problems in our culture, and Sangharakshita's own behaviour, that landed on my desk. I mean, not only my desk, it actually landed on everyone's desk. And he was very reticent about really answering the criticisms, which put me in an impossible position. And I just found that so difficult. So actually, there was, in my engagement with Sangharakshita, there's always been quite a lot of friction. And even though we got on very well personally, I also felt that it was really important to me to think my own thoughts and to be my own person. And there was because as we established early on, I came along to all of this as a teenager, quite a young teenager, took on a lot of stuff, and then as I was learning to think for myself, found myself arguing with Sangharakshita for decades in my head. So not everyone has quite such a complicated relationship with their spiritual teacher, but actually I did, and I think quite a lot of people do. And here I am. So there clearly has been a change. I felt, and as I said, I stopped working for Triratna for 20 years, and I've recently gone back, even though I've been doing things like writing this book. And I felt actually there was something I needed to resolve, and that I needed to take on board the criticism. I needed to take on board the areas where I was critical of Sangharakshita and others were as well, and put that together with this sort of response to his big vision, which is mostly what we've been talking about, and see if I could find a way of seeing it as a whole, taking it in, encompassing it as a whole. And that felt quite important to me as a kind of healing. And actually I did it because I wrote it, turned into a book, partly because I'm a writer, but also because I thought that would be helpful for other people. And I don't know if I've really done that in the book, but I've tried. I've been through that process myself, and I feel like things are much clearer between me and Sangharakshita. I don't just want to... I've always had difficulty with the term disciple. I mean, I think I am a disciple of Sangharakshita's, but I don't. It can feel a bit constraining to me, and I've had to work with all of those things. But I do feel, and actually I am now happy to say I'm a disciple of Sangharakshita's, but it's taken me an awfully long time to get there. Yes. So what's your name? Sachamani.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, before you said that, I was going to ask something about what does discipleship mean to you? Because at the beginning you said, of the book, you said this isn't a work of discipleship. But
In a simple sense.
Yeah, but I felt like that's exactly what it is, like the way you thought deeply about his teaching for so long.
Yes, I suppose it is. I'll tell you what I was thinking of when in that, which is that Subhuti wrote a book about Bhante. Subhuti is the president of this centre, he's very senior, he's my preceptor. I actually feel I am a disciple of Subhuti's because I've got this connection with him. But his book, which is called Sangharakshita, New Voice in the Buddhist Tradition, is the only other book that's tried to do what I've done. And at the start of it, he says, look, I'm not able to stand back from Sangharakshita and to sort of give a distanced view of him and to interpret him or something. I can't do that. I am a disciple of Sangharakshita. What I'm going to do is explain to you what his teachings are, which of course is a perfectly legitimate thing. But I'm not Subhuti in many respects, but I'm not Subhuti in the sense of having that relatively straightforward sense of discipleship. I did want to distance myself in order to be able to distill for myself what is it that I really... in a way that I could bring myself into that writing process. But what does it mean for me? And I want to give as much space as I can to my questions. And I actually want to make those questions quite challenging. And I didn't really, in writing it, I wasn't really giving a lot of space to that questioning process or the criticisms or so on. I just couldn't do it. It's too complicated. The book was complicated enough as it is. But that's there behind it. So that's what I mean, even if it does read like a work of discipleship not a work of, it reads as a work of discipleship, but for me it's not a work of discipleship in a simple sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm.
Yeah.
So do you think that friction
Yeah.
you described, do you think that was part of what made this book what it is? Do you think it couldn't have been like this without that?
Actually, I do.
Mm.
Yeah, actually, I do. I think I think sometimes to go deeper, it might be the case with our meditation practice.
Mm.
You know, if you think, I've got Metta Bhavana, it's all there. Sometimes it's, at least if you've got a sort of contentious mind like I have, you go deeper by saying, well, does this work? How does it work? Is this really working for me? I don't think it's working for me at all. Maybe I'll try something else. And then, oh no, there is actually something I like about this. Well, then what is it? Is it just the surface thing? Or is it something deeper? And then that might take you somewhere.
Mm.
Do you see what I mean?
Mm.
That is a kind of friction.
Mm.
I mean, I know that not everyone's mind works like this,
Mm.
but mine seems to.
Mm. Mm.
And that's just my way of doing it.
Mm. 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 Yeah, so we'll need to wrap up in a second, but I thought maybe you've touched on this a bit, but I wonder whether you could talk about you've spent a lot of your life, you've spent a good number of years doing this now. And this will have had an effect on your spiritual life.
Mm.
You've talked about how it's had an effect on your relationship with Sangharakshita, but I wonder whether, more personally, your spiritual life, what effect has it had writing this book?
Well, asking the question, what is it that I respond to in Sangharakshita, was also a way of asking the question, who am I, spiritually speaking? You know? I think in the end we all need to ask that question. And I realised that it's the imagination is really important to me. That myths and images and symbols and all of that, I love that. It sort of feels very personal, and the connections I make feel quite intimate. The poetry that I love, the art that I respond to, and that was what I was. It was saying that the fact that Sangharakshita, as I perceive him, is like that himself, and is presenting Buddhism like that, that enables his teachings to speak to me. And I think that's clarified for me what I want to do in my Dharma practice, that I must allow space for beauty. I must allow space for me to excavate and explore that sort of archetypal level of experience. I think that's probably, as well as resolving the sort of more surface tensions, I think that's the space that's opened up for me. Probably all of these books. You write about the Buddha, you write about Bhante, you're probably always writing about yourself, aren't you? Can't do anything else. But hopefully that's rather thickly disguised.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Vishvapani.